Hello everyone and welcome to this Global Leaders for Parity event on the theme of Women in Cybersecurity. Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue à cet événement offert dans le cadre du programme de mentorat de la gouvernance au féminin sur le thème des femmes en cybersécurité. It is an immense pleasure for me today to welcome an exceptional woman, Justine Bone, who has a vast international experience in the field of cybersecurity, as well as Elodie Meyer, who is a young lawyer in mergers and acquisitions who is now specializing in cybersecurity as well. And we will begin the fireside chat with Justine Bone.
She is the CEO of Florida-based cybersecurity solutions provider MedSec, which is widely recognized as a leader in medical device security solutions. Justine's previous roles include Global Chief Information Security Officer at Dow Jones, a news corporation company and publisher of the Wall Street Journal, Global Head of Information and Physical Security at Bloomberg L.P., and CEO of security research firm Immunity, Inc. She began her career as a vulnerability researcher with Internet Security Systems, now IBM, and New Zealand's Government Communications Security Bureau. Elodie Meyer is a business lawyer in mergers and acquisitions and a cybersecurity specialist who will provide statistics and information specific to the Canadian and Quebec situation. So let's begin with you, Justine. First of all, Justine, tell us, what is cybersecurity? This is the whole topic that we're covering today. I think it's becoming increasingly important in COVID days because everybody is online. Everything is happening on online platforms. And I don't think everybody always realizes the threats until something bad happens, like we've seen. Sure. With Zoom recently. I know that they fixed their problems, but there have been issues. So what is cybersecurity?
So thank you so much, Caroline, for the kind introduction. I'm thrilled to be participating in your meeting this morning. And, you know, that's actually a really tough question to answer succinctly. I actually spent quite a bit of time thinking, well, what is cybersecurity? First thing I'll say is cybersecurity is information security rebranded. And we actually did this as an industry. And I spoke about it in 2013 at a conference in Boston. And I actually asked a very technical audience to raise their hand about how they felt about us now calling information security, our profession, cybersecurity. And everybody hated it. They hated it. And I said, you know what? I like it. It might be a little more sensationalist, but people get it more. It's just a more accessible word. And it sort of fell on deaf ears, I think. But I'm very proud of that because nonetheless, we went on to rebrand this whole issue as cybersecurity. And as a result, I do think we have more attention from all walks of life to the problems as opposed to the sort of information security, computer security that was seen as a very technical problem. So cybersecurity, I think, a couple of things it's not. It's not a state. It is not a state of security that we reach and then we're done. And that's an ongoing challenge for us in the industry because a lot of folks see it as a problem that can be solved. It's a continuous risk management strategy, basically. The other thing it's not is a technology problem, or a problem to be a technology problem to be solved by technology alone. And this is another big lesson that we've learned. We came at this many years ago as a technology challenge. Of course, there's major technology components to this, but we sort of insulated ourselves as a technical community, and we were tasked with solving this problem. We've now learned that was the wrong approach. We need so many more stakeholders involved in this conversation. So it's a continuous risk management program. That's what cybersecurity is, with a heavy technology component impacting all of our lives, whether you're a corporation or an individual, and impacting it in many different
targets because there's always something new happening and
constantly changing. It's an arms race. The minute we come up with a technical solution to a certain problem, the problem changes again. So hence, it's continuous. We think we've solved, secure software development, and then the security research community will come up with a whole new way of attacking and taking over computers and networks. And so this is another lesson that we learned, is that we have to embrace the hackers amongst us, who can also be good guys as well as bad guys. And it took us a while to realize this, but in understanding what the security research community is doing, we can create more innovative, protective, defensive solutions. So that was another big learning curve for us as an industry over the past few years. But yeah, I mean, look, everyone's a target, whether you're specifically targeted, whether you're caught up in a pool of targets, whether you're the third-party innocent bystander victim of an attack launched against a third-party technology platform, whether you're an individual or a corporation, this is a problem that everybody's facing. And it's more than a problem, by the way, but we can talk about that later.
So can you give us some examples of risks? What can happen?
Well, I mean, just as we've been discussing, there are risks that make the headlines, and then there are risks that we're still understanding. So risks that make the headlines: ransomware attacks, destructive attacks that lean on extortion and the payment of ransoms in order to come out the other side. My industry, healthcare, hugely impacted by ransomware attacks. Why? Well, frankly, for a long time, our healthcare infrastructure has been a fairly easy target. And the organized crime rings behind ransomware attacks know that. But then there's the other types of risks that we don't understand well yet. And ransomware, by the way, is just one. There's the theft of data on different markets, health data versus financial data versus identity data. There's a very healthy underground for selling data. So there's always that motivation to steal data. And we hear about different ways that data is stolen, phishing attacks being one of the most common techniques. But something that I focus on is actually related to safety. And this is where it gets a little more scary. As we integrate technology into our daily lives, as we build and connect devices around us in our daily lives. I work in healthcare. We work a lot in the space of medical devices. In the scenario where these devices fail, and this could go anything from a consumer device all the way out to critical infrastructure, transportations, automobiles, we are looking at safety problems. We are looking at user safety, driver safety, patient safety, and it's a critical problem that is not easy to solve. A lot of these technologies are legacy technologies. So there's the whole myriad from safety through to loss of data. There are all types of impacts on organizations. It might be related to regulatory pressure. It might be a reputational problem. It might be a financial problem. Very, very multifaceted space.
And I mean, when we talk about safety, I've heard that even a plane can be taken over.
So the good news is things like transportation, medical devices, these are regulated industries. Thank goodness. Another thing we've learned over the years, much as we love to hate it, regulation helps us improve standards. And so, what we've seen going on with Boeing, for example, with the MAX 737s, sorry if I'm getting that acronym wrong, I can't remember the specific planes that have gone through some software update problems. We're seeing a lot of attention to that, in part forced through the regulatory authorities. Same thing with the FDA, for example, in the United States with medical devices. So growing awareness, growing understanding from the security research community, more attention, more enhancements to compliance requirements. So to become certified, there are a lot more cybersecurity requirements now for a medical device manufacturer than there ever were in the past. And I am not involved in the transportation industry, but I would bet that the same thing is going on inside of, I forget the name of the agency that oversees aviation, but I can bet that the same thing's going on inside of there, where they're looking at their compliance requirements. Their safety requirements. I can't recall right now. I'm sure somebody in the audience will.
Or ICAO, I think.
It's another whole vertical that needs a lot of attention. So standards are increasing, but again, we're looking at legacy systems. We're looking at embedded technology, embedded firmware, embedded systems that traditionally we've not needed to pay so much attention to because these systems were not connected. Now we've got this connected whole, whether it's connected systems within a plane or whether it's connected medical devices within a hospital or even a patient's home. These systems are getting connected. How do we maintain them? How do we update them? And this is a very tricky problem, but the good news is we're paying attention to it, thanks in part to the regulation and the oversight.
Right. So Justine, you've been in this field for so many years. How have things evolved?
Gosh, so much. First of all, I've been I'm grateful for the fact that I've held a few different types of positions over the years. I've been in corporate America. I've been in large enterprise running a security program. I've also been more involved on the entrepreneurial side of things. I started my career with an intelligence organization, and I moved from there into the private sector. So when I did that, for the intelligence organization, I learned a lot of really cool stuff about how to break into computers. Techniques that are extremely well understood today and are taught in classes, they're taught in universities, but back then it was kind of like a secret. This is how we secretly did these things. And when I came from that position into the private sector, which is the same time as I moved from New Zealand to the USA, it was just magic. I would go into a bank and I would explain how their new front end, banking portal could be hacked, and I'd demonstrate it, and it was met with disbelief. So we had to really go out of our way to demonstrate the problem before anyone would pay any attention to it. And that's definitely evolved. As I said earlier, there's a lot of understanding now around the security research community, understanding these offensive techniques so that we can further improve our resiliency. The other thing that changed, more in line with probably the theme here, is diversity. Not just related to within our technical community, diversity and representation of minorities. That's been a huge problem. I was the only woman in my computer science class. I was the only female hacker on my team when I moved to the USA, and that presented a lot of challenges. But also now, as cybersecurity as an industry has matured, now we understand it's more than an IT problem. All sorts of people need to contribute to thinking about this problem. So that type of diversity as well, where we have professional communicators, which, by the way, we desperately needed for a very long time in our industry, joining us and helping us raise awareness. That's typically not something that a really specialized engineer is going to do well. You need different types of involvement. So that's been another thing that's changed a lot. And then finally, I'll say this was once considered to be a technical problem. The engineers in the back lab in the corner, they'll go solve that security thing. That's no longer the case. We've seen cybersecurity awareness go up through the ranks, up to the CEO, up into the boardroom. It's well known, in fact, that cybersecurity is one of the most important risks that a company needs to tackle these days. And that's been a huge change as well. And I've been fortunate to be sort of almost riding that wave through my career. So riding that first wave of saying, hey, it's okay to learn how to hack. It's okay. All the way through to, all right, we're in the boardroom. We're all grown up now. Let's talk about cybersecurity. And it's not just a technical problem anymore.
Right. And it's interesting because on a lot of boards, actually, there are still resistance because you've got the male, pale, stale board members who don't tend to even know what a Bitcoin is, who are really running the strategy of major organizations. So it's very refreshing to see that, the risk is now taken into account because a lot of organizations have had to pay up. So they've been in situations where there's been breaches of security and things get public, right? Things get in the news. Everybody panics for, the consumers' data, etc. So
right.
But you bring me into an interesting segue about your own career. So we've talked about cybersecurity and the importance of this field, and now you're a woman in that very male-dominated field. So two questions for you to begin with. First of all, what attracted you to that industry? And second of all, what type of obstacles, if any, have you had to face as a woman? Were there additional challenges?
Gosh, yes. And, you know, maybe I'm a glutton for punishment. I went from one sort of punishing career into another. And they look very different from the outside, but my background, which is in classical ballet,
yes,
actually helped me tremendously and continues to help me through my career when it comes to managing stress, preparing to communicate. Going on a stage is scary, going into a boardroom is scary. And so that has been very helpful. Also, I think I went from one sort of...
Justine, I think you were part of the New Zealand ballet.
Correct.
What's the exact number?
The Royal New Zealand Ballet Company. Yes, correct.
Royal New Zealand
Ballet. Yes.
That was your first career?
That was my first career.
Challenging one, I'm sure.
Very, very. Look, honestly, not a terribly healthy career choice. I mean, you're in that studio being pitted against each other to get to the front of the class, to get that solo, to get perhaps that principal role. And meanwhile, you've got people yelling at you from the wings, and you've got people criticizing you from 360. And it's the whole, I could go on and on about that industry. And I hope it's evolved since then, just as cybersecurity has. But it was a very difficult process, but it creates very strong people who come out the other side of it. And then similarly, I went into this new industry where at first I thought, oh, well, I'm done with all that. I'm done with all these girls in the dressing room. Now I'm going into a lab. Oh, it's full of guys. So now I've got another sort of a hostile environment where I'm punching and kicking. And the reality is I had to do the same thing. I had to prove myself the best to get to where I wanted to go next. It wasn't going to be enough to be good enough and get a passing grade with all my colleagues and peers, because I knew that I didn't look the part, right? And back then especially, I didn't look the part. How could you be a computer hacker? Look at you, you're wearing stilettos. You know, I'm not wearing a grey hoodie and hunched over a desk and afraid to look up at anybody. No, I'll quite actually happily get up and talk to you about it. So I didn't look the part, I knew it, so I had to go above and beyond, and that absolutely continued throughout my career. Every time I had to go far beyond demonstrating that I was capable for the role to land it. And look, you know, like I say, maybe I'm a glutton for punishment. It's just been my path, and I hope I can make it perhaps a little easier for those who are now entering the industry.
Right. So what benefits do you see with more women entering the
Oh, gosh. Well, first of all, it's going to be easier for everybody to work with their peers. You know, hopefully they don't have to fight this battle like I did. And you know, all the stereotypical things happened to me, being asked why I was there, which man I belonged to at, you know, DEF CON. And that's a funny story, actually, because that actually happened. And this guy said, whose girlfriend are you? And meanwhile, I was running a company. Who was sponsoring the organization, and we were hiring. He applied for a job at our company, and he did not get the job. Surprise, surprise. Anyway, so I've been through all of that. At the end of the day, improving our diversity within our industry is going to improve our ability to solve our problems. That's what it's going to do. And things like phishing, the challenge of phishing attacks and the awareness that we need to raise related to that, having, like I said earlier, different skill sets involved in this industry. Look at what Elodie is doing with her background in law, now coming into cybersecurity. I'm so thrilled to see that, because we need her expertise in this industry alongside us technical experts. And so this is just super refreshing to see. And it goes all the way up into the boardroom. All of our specialties that we bring to the table as we mature in our careers all feed into understanding, prioritizing risks, including cybersecurity risks, and then responding to them. This is not something that just the IT people can do alone.
So last question for you, Justine, before we give the floor to Elodie to share some of her findings in that field. Because we are currently in a workshop that is dedicated to the people in our mentoring program, our mentors and our mentees, we also have some guests that we've opened it up to as well. But to address really the question of mentoring, to me, it's key to have an opportunity to speak to women like you who've had a very, an amazing international career over the years. And it's hard to make it without any support, right? So have there been mentors, sponsors, people along the way that have helped you attain your objectives?
I've absolutely had help. Mostly from my management. My CEO at Bloomberg heard me out when I came at him with a crazy proposal to create this information security group. I've been given opportunities, but I have to be frank with you, Caroline. I cannot think of certainly a female mentor that has really been there for me as someone who I can bounce ideas off. I've had to kind of figure that stuff out on my own and, punch and kick my way through the ceiling and get in front of the right audience, make my pitch, and hope that then at that point I get support. So it's not a battleground we should have to go through to get as an industry to participate in this industry. So I hope that I can help pave the way for others who want to come into this industry in a more streamlined fashion, such that folks can actually focus on the challenge and not how to get into the room. Things have changed a lot.
And how about male mentors or male sponsors? Because you mentioned you didn't have female mentors.
Right.
I have to tell you, because I do a lot of the mentor recruiting myself, our mentors are for the most part either current or past CEOs or chairs of board, so very high level. And so obviously I also recruit men, because if I was only going to recruit female CEOs, we wouldn't have enough mentors for the program. But I must say that male mentors tend to say yes when I call them much more often than women. I'm not sure why. I have a few ideas of why. But were there male mentors or male sponsors that showed themselves to be more helpful?
Yeah, definitely. There's a couple I can recall, both at a technical level and at an executive level. So I can recall at a technical level wanting to change gears a little bit at one point in my career and move more into the sort of consulting, customer-facing side from the lab environment where I was writing, new code and developing new technologies. And one of my colleagues volunteered to sort of sit down with me and just give me a few hours to show me what that business looked like. The technology wasn't the challenge. It was how does this work? How do I meet a customer? what do I say to them? Yeah. So that stands out. And that individual has gone on to a very illustrious cybersecurity career. And as someone who I know is there when I choose to reach out. And similarly, I was fortunate to have a very progressive CEO at Bloomberg who, and later at Dow Jones, who really recognized diversity in terms of gender, in terms of age as well. So this individual gave senior responsibilities to younger executives. And that was how I got my first leg up. I went, to the CEO with a proposal, a well thought through proposal, but a scary one. And he gave me that sort of sink or swim opportunity, and there's a lot of CEOs who will not do that. They'll look for the 20 years of experience first. And I think hopefully we're seeing a little bit of this exploration now in the boardroom where boards are opening their eyes to going beyond the male pale stale, as you referred to, and bringing in younger people, bringing in just more diversity, including gender diversity.
And it's interesting, in Quebec, we've got a legislation that was voted about, I would say 2 years ago, that requires that all state corporations, all our crown corporations in Quebec, have at least one, well, first of all, it's been 10 years that they require parity, so there's 50% women, but, that's only the crown corporations, so that's about 23 organizations in Quebec. So the utilities, the liquor board, that type of organization. But they've added a couple of years ago that each one of these boards needed to have one individual who was less than 35 years old. And I thought that was extremely refreshing to recognize the fact that, we may have 20 or 30 years or more of experience, but there are things that we don't know simply because, virtue of the generation. So I think that's a good segue to hear Elodie, who, as we mentioned earlier, is a mergers and acquisition business lawyer who has decided to specialize in cybersecurity. Bonjour, Elodie.
Bonjour, Caroline. Thank you, Justine, for those remarks. Very interesting. Well, actually, I'm going to jump off right from a few things that Justine said. But firstly, cybersecurity is often seen as an expense in company settings, but it's an investment. In the end, cybersecurity is extremely important, especially within companies. Individuals are often attacked, but corporations are where all the money is, right? And so more and more we see companies being attacked by the most common cyber threats, as Justine mentioned, phishing attacks, ransomware attacks. Those are the most common threats to companies. And what they have in common is that they often aim at the weakest link in the cybersecurity chain, which is the employee. We often talk about the technical side of cybersecurity and how the IT department has to be heavily involved to secure a network. But when most of the threats are actually aimed directly at the employees of a company, and there's not much the IT department can do for that. And well, that's when cybersecurity becomes really everyone's business, governance in particular, human resources, and so on. And really the training and the awareness of the employees is what's fundamental to protect a company correctly. And that's where it's an investment and not an expense. A company has to have an internet and cyber policy. It has to have training and awareness at least annually, maybe even twice a year, to refresh, because it's ever evolving, right? As Justine said, we need to make sure that we keep up with the current trends, and that we fight off attacks properly. Most attacks will be towards data, right? It's data breach is what happens through those ransomware attacks, those phishing attacks, and data, for instance, personal data, data that is proper to any person, is data that's being sold massively on the web, but this data is being stolen from companies, not individuals directly. So more specifically to Quebec and Canada, we have privacy laws, obviously, which relates more to the legal aspect of my practice as well. And privacy laws in Quebec and Canada have been lacking for a long time. When we initially legislated around privacy laws, Quebec was actually one of the first ones to do so. The first bill, which is still the bill that is currently in place or enforced in Quebec, dates from 1994. At the time, Quebec was actually the first legislature in North America to adopt a privacy law. It is, well, very outdated by now. And Europe has actually come in with what we call the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, that was adopted in 2016 and became applicable in 2018, which is the most restrictive regulation in the world regarding privacy data. Now, Quebec has realized that they have a lot of catching up to do. And so just recently, actually last month, on June 12, they proposed Bill 64 to the Quebec National Assembly. And this Bill 64 will be the most restrictive in North America as well, and will be very, very similar to the GDPR that is currently enforced in Europe. So what that means for board responsibility and governance responsibility is, for example, much tougher penalties. The current bill, in its current state in Quebec, fines range from $1,000 to $10,000 up to $20,000 for repeat offenses for anything relating to data breach of personal information. With this new bill, we're talking about sanctions of up to $10 million or 2% of worldwide turnover in administrative settings. And if we consider that it should actually be tried under the penal code, then we're talking about up to $25 million in fines and 4% of worldwide turnover. So for a company,
clarify, these are fines that organizations have to pay because they did not properly protect their
personal information. And this is
so like
specific.
British Airways would have to pay the government if fine.
Absolutely. So in Quebec, it's the Commission de l'accès à l'information who would give out this fine for administrative fines. Penal fines would be the Crown government. That would be the same as any other penal fine. But we can see that, so $10,000 as a maximum fine before for companies there was no incentive there. $10,000 is more than the cost to update your cybersecurity, so they would usually just avoid that altogether. Today, if your fine can go up to $10 or $25 million, then obviously companies are thinking about it much more. So this new bill also imposes requirements for governance to establish practices and policies regarding personal data. It increases accountability and governance for companies, meaning that today the person within the company who is responsible for the personal data is not the IT department anymore. It is the government. It is if the CEO does not appoint someone else to be in charge of privacy and personal data, then he has this charge, which is, I mean, it's a big hat to be wearing when you're trying to run a business, right? But cybersecurity, as we said, it's everyone's business. It's not just the IT department. Governance really needs to be on top of it.
So organizations have to pay fines, but they also have to pay hackers on top of that if their data has been.
Absolutely, and so those are typically the ransomware attacks that we know of. So a few statistics here. Well, this is more general, US and Canada actually, but they say that between 2018 and 2019, ransomware attacks grew 365%. And since just the beginning of the year, so first quarter of 2020 in Canada, they grew by another 50%, just the first quarter of 2020. Now, the average demand of a hacker for ransomware is usually a few tens of thousands of dollars. So $15,000 would be the usual demand. It can go higher up. It can be a few $100,000, but it'll never be in the millions. However, we've seen, more of the reported cases are in the US, but we've seen companies or governments, city governments, refuse to pay ransoms and have recovery costs high up in the millions. For instance, Atlanta City in 2018 was attacked by a ransomware. The whole network, the whole system of the city was shut down, so including dispatch for ambulances and police and whatnot. And the ransom was demanding $52,000, which is a lot of money, but not a lot of money in that context, right? However, Atlanta City government decided not to pay, and it cost them $17 million to recover all the damage that had been done. So $52,000, $17 million. The comparison is quickly made.
The smart thing to do, I guess, is just to be prepared and not to be, a victim of the ransomware to begin with. This is super. To begin with, and that,
yes. And just to finish on that, so. The importance to not be attacked by the ransomware initially is to have employees who are properly prepared, properly trained, and won't be clicking on a link in an email or won't be downloading things onto the work computer that they shouldn't be downloading, visiting websites and so on. And that's where the internet policy becomes super important in corporate settings. And maybe just to conclude quickly on ransomware, in 2016, the US paid about 10% of ransoms, Europe about 30%, and Canada about 60%. And we were always looking at those numbers and asking, well, why? And why is there's such a disparity? But by looking at closely,
everybody says it. We're nice.
Everybody's so nice. But actually, now that I've looked at more recent numbers, so 2018, 2019 numbers, that we see a big increase in the US where they're paying more and more ransoms. So they're up to 30% in 2019, 45% in 30% in 2018, 45% in 2019, and they're expected to go up to 60% in 2020, just like Canada, because they're starting to realize that recovery costs are much higher than the ransom that's being asked. Hackers are actually now honoring their word. Initially, about 60% of people who paid ransom actually received their data back. Now we're up to 90%. So hackers are giving data back to people after stealing it, right? And then, as we were speaking with Justine a bit earlier, insurance, cyber insurance is developing a lot. Sorry?
I said honorable thieves, I guess.
Honorable thieves, I guess, absolutely. And now, as we said, so cybersecurity, cyber insurance is also developing, meaning insurance companies are doing the whole negotiation part with the hackers. And so the whole "we don't negotiate with terrorists" kind of, was set aside.
Wow.
So there you go. In Canada, we have a lot of ransomware attacks. We usually pay. We usually recoup all the data. The only problem is that we don't know what they do with the copy of that data, right? They usually sell it on the dark web. They can sell it to companies, legitimate companies, Google, Facebook. Targeted ads come from data which is mostly stolen from other people. And then governments, either local or foreign, either for intelligence within their own country or for, there's all sorts of use for data today, and that's why it's the new gold. It's the gold of the internet. It's what people really want to get their hands on.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much, Elodie. Thank you so much, Justine. I think we'll move into the Q&A period that Laure Cohen, who's here with us. Laure is a coach and a facilitator and has been our co-chair of our mentoring program for the past 5, almost 6 years now, and an integral element to our team. So Laure is going to be, I don't know if you've already got questions from the public that you'd like to ask of either Elodie or Justine. And as we said, ça peut être en français ou en anglais, depending on whether...
Great. Thank you so much to all our panelists. It's such a vast topic that we really need to investigate more and pay attention more to. So as Caroline said, I am a facilitator in particular in appreciative inquiry. So I love appreciating and inquiring a little bit more. One of the important questions is, what do we want more of and what do we want less of? So this question, and I have 2 questions in the Q&A. Since I'm just moderating, I'll take the privilege to ask the first question to Justine, in this case. For the future, what is the vision? What is your vision of the future? And what do you think we need more of and less of in order to make cybersecurity a vital element of our growth and of our future?
Interesting question. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. What we want more of is security built in from the get-go to our infrastructure. Historically, we've built systems, be that devices, be that operating systems, be that applications, and then we've bolted on security either in a very late stage or even in some cases after we've deployed the solution. Look at an operating system, for example, a Windows system. We're all used to buying antivirus for our systems at a later state. And what we're seeing now, especially in the manufacturing space, are the more responsible and forward-looking manufacturers building in security at every layer of the system. So if it's a laptop or a printer manufacturer, for example, like I work with, you'll see people thinking about the hardware problems, the embedded chips inside these systems and what we're doing with security there. Then throughout the stack, through the operating system, the applications, the network connectivity, building in security the whole way through and trying to make it usable, as close to invisible as we can possibly get it, so that security is just there, and things that have been a problem in the past, like passwords, for example, are gradually phased out in exchange for other forms of authentication. So that's what we want more of. We want more security built into our systems from the whiteboard design phase. And I can tell you, my industry, the sort of technologists involved in cybersecurity, are endlessly frustrated when we receive a call. It might be 2 weeks before a vendor wants to ship a new product, and they say, hey, would love you to come in for a quick security review. Make it real quick. Just want to check off, make sure we've done all the right things. We've definitely done all the right things. We've got a lot of experts here, so believe me, you can't break it. This just happens. It happened 20 years ago. It happens today. And we kind of roll our eyes and take a big breath and we go in there. And 9 times out of 10, we find problems. Some of them can be fixed in that last minute stage. Some of them cannot. Some of them are dependent upon early decisions related to the hardware or the chipset design or the form factor of a device where, sorry, but it's going to be really hard to introduce encryption to this medical device. It wasn't considered in the beginning, so what do we do now? And it becomes a very, very expensive problem to fix. So that's what we want more of that security awareness built in and reflected through that process of designing and deploying new technologies.
Really, really interesting examples. I can relate to passwords and to Windows updates, for sure.
Yeah. Passwords are, we've become more open to adopting what we call biometric solutions these days. And it started with the iTouch on the Apple phones, where we started putting our fingerprint on the reader. That was a really critical moment for the entire industry because it made biometrics normal. Before that, biometrics were like super secret spy techniques that, nuclear bunkers would use before you could get your iris scanned or your fingerprint taken to walk into a military complex industrial environment. And people were scared of it in the mainstream. People were like, whoa, biometrics. I'm giving up my fingerprint. That's scary. Apple helped us get over that hump and get to the point where people are comfortable now with that. Now we're up against facial recognition. So facial recognition is now being used to authenticate people. This can be used for good. This can be used for bad. This can be used for surveillance and all that bad stuff. But it also can be used to make our lives easier. So we sit down and we're logging in securely, and we don't have to remember that password anymore. So that's where we're at today in terms of dealing with that password problem.
Super interesting. I have 2 questions, very interesting as well, so I'll read them out loud. The first one is the following. We are hearing about the risks associated with TikTok. Amazon attempted to stop employees from having the app on their phone. India has banned it, and the US is looking into banning it. Can you explain what the concerns are and what risks they present for business and individuals?
I'll give you my thoughts on this. We have also suffered from a lack of transparency when it comes to technology platforms of all kinds. Again, it could be hardware devices, it could be social media apps and everything in between. How do you know what Zoom is doing with your data right now? Mm-hmm. Well, it's a US company. It's been subject to a lot of recent scrutiny. That their leadership have been held accountable and have had to stand up and talk to this. So they've sort of put their reputation on the line. Do we know the same thing about TikTok? What we read is that TikTok is a Chinese-backed company, Chinese company. They have not been transparent about the way it works. What sort of data is it collecting? Where is it going? What is it being used for? So I suspect that's where most of the sentiment is coming from. Should we only be trusting our friendly countries' technology platforms? It's the same thing with the Huawei conversation about 5G networks. Can we trust this infrastructure? We don't know. And unfortunately, it becomes a political conversation very quickly. There are other ways that we can address this that are non-political, but it's scary for large technology providers to introduce transparency because this becomes then a matter of intellectual property protection. If, as a technology provider, I'm required to open up the kimono and talk about what I'm doing with your data, how I'm gathering it, what my secret machine learning algorithms are to generate recommendations based on analyzing that data, that might be the whole value of my company right there. That's my intellectual property. And this, again, is why this is a board-level conversation. When you're in charge of producing a technology, to what extent are you prepared to talk about how that technology works? Because in this day and age, if you're gathering data, just about everybody is, you're going to be asked about it. So how are you going to cooperate with people when they start, whether it's the media, your customers, regulators? People are going to be asking you about it. So how do you tackle that? What are you prepared to do and what are you not prepared to do? Again, that's a board level conversation. So that's what I think is going on with the TikTok situation. Probably just a lack of transparency and a mistrust on the folks who are behind it.
I love the word conversation because you mentioned that it can easily be sidelined to a political conversation.
Right.
And that's so interesting to see how the inroads of other disciplines come into the cybersecurity world.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is really for those who are producing technology, and just about every company is a technology company these days. It's a risk-based decision. But another quick point I want to make is it's also an opportunity. If you, as a technology provider, have invested, as Elodie mentioned, if you've invested in cybersecurity to the point that you've got a fairly good program in place, this becomes an opportunity for a company to differentiate. And this is where I get really excited about sort of the next generation of cybersecurity. We go beyond being a problem and a challenge to an opportunity for a company to say, hey, look at us. Look at the way Zoom's turned things around. First thing they did was they brought together a bunch of very well-known security experts. They gave them the freedom to talk publicly about what Zoom is doing. They built trust, and now we're all using Zoom with confidence. That turned into a competitive advantage for them. They took that challenge and turned it into a competitive advantage. So large organizations that have invested can now think, how can I use this investment? How can I showcase this investment? How can I use this to get in front of my competitors? Because we've built a resilient technology. We're prepared to talk about it to a certain point. So it becomes an opportunity. And that's actually what really excites me going forward in my career and for the industry is how can we start really using this investment in a positive way?
If we have time, I'll have one other question. With people working from home, what are the primary risks for business in this new world? So you just spoke about possibilities and opportunities for us, but as individuals working from home, what are the risks for us? And maybe what are the possibilities?
Sure. I would quickly say that, as an employee working from home, you're protecting yourself, your family, and your company. And if you talk about all three of those potential areas of exposure, luckily, right now, we're probably not talking about safety risks. We're probably talking about risks to your data and risks to your identity. So the two big fundamental best practices that we all need to look for is protection of data via encryption and protection of your identity, the way that you log in and authenticate yourself. So red flags are things like just a single password that I use to log in. No option to have what we call multi-factor authentication. So no option for a special code to be sent to me in addition to me providing my password. If you use a technology platform and all it wants is a password, and if you notice that when you move around, you take your phone and you log in from different networks, and you change and you log in from your kid's laptop, and then you log in from your work device, and every single time, all you've got to do is remember one password, definite red flag. That technology should know better at this point, and they should have something called multi-factor authentication enabled. So things related to the way that you log in, and then secondarily, which is a little bit harder to understand, is my sensitive data being encrypted? So what sort of data am I literally sending over the wire right now? If I'm a CFO for a large organization, you're going to want to make sure that your company's financials that you're working on that are being sent between you and your company systems are encrypted. And that's where things like disclosures from the technology providers, attestations about the level of encryption that are being used become critical for you to make that decision between what's potentially a reasonably secure system versus one that's not.
If I can just add something to that, well, in a house, well, now that we're all working at home in the current context, we talked about phishing attacks earlier, but there's something even more specific, which they call spear phishing attacks, which is a more sophisticated form of phishing attack, which is an email-borne attack, right, where someone sends an email to someone pretending to be someone else. And with this spear phishing, we're seeing more and more, for instance, executives, especially assistants who are being targeted by emails that they think come from their boss or from any executive of the board, asking for something very specific, either send money to this place or go do this and that. And I mean, they think it's coming from their boss, right? So they do it without questioning it. And that's one of the most, well, it's developing a lot, and especially during this time, everyone being home and not necessarily seeing their colleagues face to face makes it harder to assess if that is if it's a legitimate email or if it's someone who's trying to phish your information.
We've had it at Women in Governance, actually, where my assistant has received an email supposedly from me asking her to go buy some gift cards and send pictures of the codes, which unfortunately she did, thinking that I was really asking for this. And then we realized, because they kept asking for more, so it unfortunately worked.
And this is something that we can, at least in part, address with technology solutions. And this is where you do need an expert to come in sometimes. On the part of the company, the way that the email system is set up, there are certain ways where we can verify the authenticity of the sender of the email. And there are also different platforms that we can adopt to put applications such as browsers into containers or little virtualized boxes within our system, where even if someone who is targeted clicks on that link, the resulting technology that perhaps gets downloaded to your computer is analyzed first by security systems before it's executed. So there are security protections that can be built in, but the easiest, fastest way forward right now, as Elodie mentioned earlier, is awareness and having protocols in place where perhaps someone critical in the organization who does have the ability to move money around will double check any request. And it's up to us as CEOs to not be offended when somebody says, "Hey, is that really you?" emailing me at 5 o'clock in the morning asking, it might be, it might not be, you know, so that it's good if they double check on that.
Agreed. Okay, wonderful. Laura, I believe this is all the time that we had for
Unfortunately, yes.
questions.
I'll hand it over to you.
I'm sorry?
I'll hand it over to you to close, because I think we're waiting on the other line for networking.
The other group that's going into a networking session for mentors and mentees from our program. And I think it's a good opportunity for me to share with people who might not be in the program, since we've opened this event up to a wider audience, that we have now launched our program in a more global fashion, in the sense that it's virtual. So we do have people who are registered who are in different continents. So it's quite fascinating. We've had people register from Europe and the Middle East, and obviously the United States, to be both mentors or mentees. And the other opportunity that we've taken is that instead of only focusing on women who are at the vice president level and who want to go through that glass ceiling and become a CEO or chair of board, we've opened it up to women, professional women at all levels, because we do want to prepare a healthy pipeline of female talent. So I want to thank from the bottom of my heart Justine for accepting to take some of her time and give us all those generous comments this morning, and sharing her experience from the Royal New Zealand Ballet to a top executive in cybersecurity. I want to thank Elodie, who also from the mergers and acquisitions lawyer, who's now specializing in cybersecurity as well. I'm very proud of both of you. We need more women in cyber. We need more women in STEM in general. So it's extremely exciting to see all the work that you've accomplished, and thank you for your presence today. Laure and the other co-chairs of the mentoring program, thank you also. We'll let you take it away to your networking event. And thanks for everyone who attended. And please join our newsletter on womeningovernance.org if you haven't signed up yet. Merci beaucoup. À très bientôt tout le monde.